Thursday night. Welcome aboard. Murder Hobo Inc. presents Between the Rolls, the Socium project. Thanks for joining us. If you've been here before, welcome back. If this is your first time, hey, thanks for showing up. We got a good show for you. We're wrapping up religion in our respective worlds, so we're going to be discussing that. Let's get on to the business at hand. Follow us on Twitter, mhobo inc. Email us, mhoboinc. Join our Discord, tinyurl.com, mhoboinc. Discord. If you want to buy our cool crap, shirts, phone cases, throw pillows, blankets, women's thongs, we got a lot of shit. Take a look down below. There's a link for that. If you're in the mood for new math rocks, at Pirate Dog Dice is finally getting through all the back orders and making headway. So if you're interested, go ahead and put in some information over at Pirate Dog Dice on Twitter. See if they can hook you up. And if your game stinks, unlike ours smells like success. You can grab yourself some Adventure Scents by oddfishgames.com. They have over 60 different scents. We've thrown out a few ideas for some more, but I'm pretty sure they're going to get vetoed because this show is not for children. It is for mature audiences only. Keep that in mind. If you don't like it, please move along and find a show that you do like. But Oddfish Games has 60 great scents, except Putrid Sewers. Although when Kyle did nearly choke to death, that was kind of funny. Do not snort the Adventure Scents. They also make
$5 if you snort the Adventure Scents.
We've got it on tape. If you go look at the archive, we've got Kyle choking to death, and it was glorious. We all felt bad, but it was glorious. They also make something called the Shine System, so if you want to be a writer like me, only gooder, check that out. They have how to cook with dice and how to RPG with your cat. And coming up in September, new Kickstarter, oddfishgames.com. You got something, Spencer?
No,
okay. I thought you were warning me. Wasn't sure if I said anything off the cuff. Folks, this is our collective of DMs. We've got one more joining us, I think. He had some other issues that he had to take care of. Let's introduce you to him. Spencer, you're in the top left. You start it.
Hi, I'm Spencer Zimmerman. I'm a DM. I've been gaming for, 20-something years now, playing all sorts of varieties. Right now, I've just been really enjoying this opportunity to co-build a world with my fellow DMs and kind of put something to paper. It's been a really fun time.
Well said. Ian, take the reins.
I like the fact that it's between the rolls, so that makes one of you a roll and one of you a roll, and I'm like whatever the filling is. So I guess I should point up, not down. So yes, Ian Servas. I'm usually the forever GM of Wandering Monster, which is another great TTRPG live play podcast. So we stream every Wednesday at 8:30 Central to 10:30 Central P. And you always see me running something interesting. This is definitely a great collaboration here with world building and getting to build further into the world of Socium. So looking forward to it.
How do they get to watch that other podcast?
So that is all of our handlers are WanMonCast or Wandering Monster. So at Twitter, at Twitch, on Facebook, WanMonCast. Or even WanMonCast.com. And no, we don't sell things like fancy little grains of sand that smell like Frank's armpits or ladies' underwear. But
this is beautiful. We don't get a kickback on those, and I buy them for conventions. So, nothing special. But I like if you go to a convention or you have an in-person game, highly recommend. It really brings it out. There you go, folks. So if you
what about you, Frank? Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about what brings you here?
Nobody gives a shit about me. I am rude, post highly inflammatory political posts on the Philbar account. And if you don't recognize me, you are new to this show. I've been here since the goddamn door opened. Over 550 episodes. 550. That's a lot of episodes. I'm tired, but I've been playing since the 80s. I think everybody should play. I don't care what version they play. I just want them to have fun. And like I said, if you don't like our podcast, go out and find Wanmon or
we are
Game Night
D&D
Heroes.
free. We'll play any TTRPG but D&D. So
Tunnels and Trolls.
Sure.
Big fan. Huge fan of Tunnels and Trolls. Cut my teeth on that along with D&D. That's enough about me. Nobody really gives a shit, and that's fine. I don't mind. I'm old. I don't care. Tonight, we've already had part one of our other 4 DMs talking about religion. Tonight, you're going to hear from us 3 and Jason if he gets here in time. So we are collaborating. We've taken a map of a nation that we created, and we've gone ahead and parsed it out into different things. Boy, I sure wish it looked better. Wow. This thing is loading slow. We have parsed out a nation, and we've gone ahead and selected a variety of nations. Unfortunately, Jason is finally arrived, and he's going to go ahead and talk while I try and figure out what the hell I did wrong. So, Jason. And he's gone. So, I'm on the spot again. Folks, see, not professional at all. Just not professional. But that's okay. Anyway, we've all taken some nations. We've got a lot to discuss about our nations. If you've missed the previous months, check them out. It's called Socium Project. This is episode 16. So, real easy to catch up on. And now, as long as Jason is here, for real.
For real.
Good. Jason, I am mumbling my way through this goddamn show. If you could go ahead and tell us who you are, please.
I'm the late Jason, apparently, but I'm here now.
That's the important.
Is this like projecting from the grave? The late Jason.
As the undead Jason. Part-time DM, full-time observer of other DMs.
Nicely said. And that did give me enough time to get my head out of my ass. So, gents, let's do this. We're going to talk religion tonight. Spencer, your first one up. Which nation do you want to discuss?
Sure. We'll start with Kaizen, as I usually start there, and that's I've considered a pretty fun one. So we are in the far southwest of Socium. Yeah, there we are.
Boop, there we go.
Yes, the very rocky and mountainous area of Kaizen. So, Kaizen as a region, if you remember, has a history of rebellion. That these are the goblinoids, the goblins, hobgoblins, and bugbears that rose up in rebellion against a previous empire. And that's kind of where their religion started, because they weren't really allowed to have a organized religion when they were under the yoke of oppression. So their religion is that of just worshiping the ancestors that they once thought would help them survive in their turbulent and tumultuous lives as slaves. So today, nearly all citizens of Kaizen worship their ancestors, primarily through the temples of the Seer's Eye. That is the overall hierarchy of temples across Kaizen. Individuals will pray at a local shrine, either inside their home or something on the road, generally to their direct ancestors like great-grandparents and others who have passed away before them. However, communities will come together in a larger local temple and engage in group worship during festivals and holidays of larger significance. Each temple is led by a local priest or shaman that generally comes from the surrounding community, often passed down from generation to generation. But temple adoption is not unheard of, where one temple will have multiple children and they'll kind of sire it off to a different temple so that that child learns of the customs of the other area, which is actually really important because customs can vary widely from even valley to valley. So, for example, one community might engage in a very raucous and drunken celebration at the start of spring, while another over the mountain will take a much more subdued approach and welcoming the warmer months. So even individual towns could have completely different celebrations when it comes to worshiping their ancestors and kind of bringing in the various seasons. And those are where most of the holidays are welcoming the changing of the 4 seasons. So the biggest one is actually the harvest season, the coming of fall, which is the Festival of Dusk and Light. And it's during this time that communities will come together to play music, dance, and light great bonfires. They'll celebrate literally all night long because it's believed that the spirits of their ancestors will come and dance with them the longer that they dance. The more ancestors, the further back their ancestors will come. So it's a time to kind of show off your prowess as a dancer, how long you can stay awake, and show off in front of your ancestors. Be like, hey, look at how well we've got it to those who have lived before you.
A question from the audience there, Spencer.
Oh, yeah.
Why is that? I believe they are asking why one part would have a different celebration than the other. I think
because Kaizen is a very the communities are very self-sufficient. They don't need to interact very much with a greater hierarchy. So there's not much of an organized religion. There's no single god that people worship to. So there's no need to have a single specific way of worship. So your way of worshiping is dependent on kind of what your ancestors did before you. Because your job is to venerate your literal, like, your dead ancestors. If your great grandfather was a drunkard, you're going to be drinking in his honor. If your great grandfather was a fighter, you might do mock combats in his honor. So you're going to be doing things dependent on who your ancestors were.
Okay.
It's a very kind of localized religion. There is a hierarchy that exists. The groups of villages are led by a high seer who will mediate disputes between them because, we're dealing with religion. People get angry about what you can and shouldn't do. But so there's got to be someone in charge in a larger area. And ultimately, any disputes are taken all the way to the central eye. The central eye is the highest in the seer's eye order, who is the high priest at Mount Kairos. So that's our lovely volcano there. That is the tallest and most active of the volcanoes in Kaizen, and it is where his temple is located. It's almost always a guy. Mount Kairos is not only the largest, most active volcano, it is also home to the largest temple complex that is continually under construction. Because it's a volcano, it's always falling apart. There's always earthquakes. There's always more lava flows. Something's always falling into a ravine that just opened up. So it's always being rebuilt.
So it's like 865 in Indianapolis?
Yeah, correct. Exactly. 465. Yeah, it's 465 in Indianapolis. Exactly. It's literally never done. You think it's done, it's not done. So that's what's going on. The other parts of religion in Kaizen, so that's kind of like the local level, right? The individual person's going to be worshiping their ancestor. At a bit of a larger level, every single mountain and peak in Kaizen is considered a sacred space, and you're not allowed to walk on it. So actual people can't travel on top of the land across most of Kaizen. That is why so many tunnels have to be dug in order for people to traverse across the country. The land itself, the peaks themselves, are guarded by a protector, and each mountain has its own guardian. Smaller mountains, smaller shrines, smaller protectors. So you get like ogres and trolls and Etons for some of like the really small ones, maybe a griffin, if you're really like basically a hill. Whereas the larger the mountains get, you get to Onis, ogre mages, depending on what you're going with. I got a list over here. What is it? Wyverns and rocks, massive birds who have very large territories. And of course, the largest of all mountains are reserved for dragons. They are the guardians of the greatest peaks. Usually red dragons, but as it gets closer to the swamps, there are a number of black dragons that also have some of the biggest mountains under their purview and guardianship.
Nice.
I have a question for Spencer.
Yeah.
Just in terms of, so if I remember from our previous shows,
Mhm.
Kaizen, there's an evil under
Yes.
the mountain, right?
Yes.
So how does that evil, or does that evil manifest in any way, not just with the seers, but through the religious observances, whether the people know that that's what they're doing or not? Is there a connection with the religion that ancestors worship and the evil?
Very much so. So there's actually two things. One, I'm calling the Great Primordial. This primordial being that lives in Mount Kairos. That there is no protector of Mount Kairos, the greatest of all mountains, because it lives there. It lives under it. So no other creature dares be on it, because they know something's there. Two, the central eye, the great seer of Kaizen, he is actually the head of a smaller cabal that knows the truth about this primordial. And when we say that his temple is, consistently falling into disrepair and always breaking apart, that's partially by design. They're sacrificing people to this great primordial. So they're like, oh, we need to make a sacrifice. Let's just get rid of the East Wing. And then we'll rebuild it, and then we can sacrifice it again in a couple of years. So he knows what's going on. He knows the truth and is leading a small group of other seers that live in Mount Kairos about the knowledge that they have to keep this thing placated, or else it's going to erupt and bring them about their downfall. So that's one of the secret cults, and it's like the highest of echelons has this secret cult going on. Some people have kind of gotten whispers of it at the, in the spy networks. They know something's going on, but they don't know exactly what's happening. There is another cult, and this is actually on the opposite end. So if the cult of the primordial is very, very top, the people, a number of the everyday lay folk have started to worship Kaizen the Great, the person that they believe brought about their salvation from this evil empire, as a god. They believe that he has transcended the land of the ancestors and has become a deity in his own right. And so they are beginning to worship him as a deity itself, which they keep secret because they know by worshiping him, they're kind of letting their ancestors slip by, which everyone else would see as taboo. So they have to keep their own worship secret as they continue to try to build up this cult of Kaizen the Great.
So, Spencer, I have a question. So if they've begun to worship Kaizen the Great, does Kaizen the Great ever manifest as a being on this plane?
He could. He was a person before, and it's believed that the spirits do come back. So if enough people begin to worship him, he might. They don't know. They kind of think that is a thing that can happen, and some of the proselytizers are beginning to preach that, but it's just beginning. So they kind of like want to bring about this new god.
Since you've indicated the ancestor worship and the primordial and now Kaizen is these three separate elements, is there a deity plane that you have in your religion that's interfacing with the material realm at some point? Is there a juxtaposition there?
Yeah, it would be the land of the ancestors. It's kind of like the afterlife. Yeah.
Is that where Kaizen would manifest then, if he were to manifest?
He might manifest. He could manifest. The belief is that he has already transcended that plane, and he has gone on to become like a greater deity.
So there is another level, another plane of existence that is truly for deities, reserved for deities.
Yeah, that's like a new concept to the hobgoblins. They haven't had this concept before because it was kind of they weren't allowed to. And so now they're kind of thinking, oh, these other places, they have gods. So maybe like Kaizen's a god. And so it's a total change in their worldview about what can happen.
So I love that idea of the hobgoblin suddenly like becoming illuminated and going, you know what?
Yeah.
There's another plane with hobgoblin gods. It just makes me wonder if all of a sudden they're going to start spontaneously going, well, the hobgoblin god of Gruul will bless this feast, and all of a sudden you get this spontaneous combustion of hobgoblin gods.
Yeah, like right now they're just praying to their ancestors, like, oh, thank you for the food and allowing us to live. And so like the ancestors, like this very diffuse and diverse amount of worship, clerics and shamans that kind of interspace with the spirits and gain all this power through their previous generations. But yeah, there easily could be a time where ideas coalesce and gods form out of this kind of primordial mist and miasma of religious existence that is like the hobgoblin ancestor plane.
Would they be connected to the primordial?
One would hope not.
That just creates this weird dynamic. If the hobgoblins who are trying to transcend evil, imagine gods, but who are secretly touched by evil.
Yeah, exactly. It's why we hope that would not happen.
Gee, that'd be too bad.
Between this nascent hero cult and the actual primordial cult, will that come to a head?
Probably not, because the primordial cult is one of very like the very rich, right? The very top of the echelon, whereas the hero cult, this earlier cult, is something that's only the everyday people. And so it could come to a head if knowledge of both like occurs, and then there might be conflict between the two, but the two are kind of like on opposing spectrums of the social strata.
I mean, I was thinking more of like, would the primordial become jealous?
Oh, the primordial doesn't. My understanding is it doesn't care what other people feel about it. It just needs its continual feeding.
All right, that works.
Cool. Any other questions for Spencer? Ian, which country do you want to talk about first?
Why don't we go ahead and, since we've talked about Kaizen, why don't we pop over to Region Q, the Scorned Isle, due west. Thereabouts. So, tiny and cramped, but we'll go with that. So this isn't necessarily settled like other areas of the island, so there is no resident culture per se, but there are some elements about this that are kind of unique to it. One of the regions, so for people who haven't seen previous episodes, this was a peninsula of the main continent that was blasted off after the Primordial, that used to be the resident god for the empire that was on this island, abandoned its people because they decided not to honor the god by feeding it and following its worship. So it just blew up the peninsula, shattered the island, removed all traces of itself, and just defected to Kaizen. So that being said, this has been an area where there hasn't been any real settling. So Newport is the one area of civilization per se, and it's been a series of doomed and failed ports, and this is the newest iteration. So people bring their own religious traditions from wherever they come from when they settle in Newport. The only thing that's really unique to the people is this thing called a lament. So the people of Newport can kind of feel this lingering presence on the isle, and no one's really exactly sure what it is, whether it's a true god, a spirit, or just a superstition, but it's an undeniable force as much as the wind and the rain. And the people kind of call this taint the lament, and some make charms against it by taking pieces of items associated with sorrow, like pieces of wood from a shipwrecked vessel, or a broken bit of a killing blade, or a cherished memento that was shattered beyond repair, as a way to kind of keep off the general looming gloom of this place. Keep in mind that there's tons of ruins that are dotted across the moor, so when the winds go through it, there's a low moaning sound because of just wind going through open holes or shattered portals. And then also the fact that there's no fauna on this island. There's just this kind of weird thing that would be summed up easily as like an ash walker, almost like a zombie revenant thing, that were former inhabitants of this island that were like Vesuvius or like Pompeii, people that were immolated and their corpses and their husks left in the moor. So people that kind of worship or kind of venerate this concept of the lament use these amulets and talismans to protect themselves against the creatures and the general just sadness of the island. But the items don't have any real effect because there is no god or no force called the lament. It's just kind of this superstitious belief. But that hasn't stopped people from buying into this concept, and there's some rumors that there may actually be cults dedicated to the lament in Newport that are beginning to fester. So that's one of the kind of, I guess you could say, religions of this place, perhaps maybe tradition, depending on who you ask. And as far as gods, the other one would be, as Spencer would call it, the primordial, being nameless itself. Some people just call it the Scorned One, but so great was the wrath of the formal god of this island that it destroyed all traces of its name when it left. The crumbled texts and charred records give inklings into its eldritch nature and origin, but little else remains. Scholars of this mystery have tried to pry clues from the elders of Kaizen, but to no avail. If a god wants to make itself not known, then little can be done to learn its secrets. But some observant scouts have noticed some strange behavior in the Forsaken, those ash walkers, zombie-like things, in the lowest levels of intact ruins, behavior that looks almost ritualistic in nature.
Hey,
So depending
can I ask a
guess
question?
yeah.
So for the Forsaken, the zombie revenant-looking things, the Ashwalkers, are how sentient are they?
They aren't for the majority of them. They aren't. So they are just these doomed things that shun the light. So they during the daytime hide themselves in ruins, or they sink themselves into bogs, or anything that they can do to kind of scurry out from the light. And as soon as it starts getting dusk, they start to swarm out of the ruins and find intruders and either drown them into death in the acidic bogs, or just bludgeon them to death. So they're not sentient per se, except there are rumors that maybe there are some that show some semblance of intelligence in the largest and deepest ruins, ones that are closer to the area on the map called Folly's Doom.
And so for the Scorned God that's responsible for this tragedy that befell this isle, the link to these creatures, is there a suggestion that the ritualistic behavior is linked to this god then?
So for the whole history of the island, so those are basically the people that were denizens of this land before the cataclysm. So things that weren't completely immolated, their charred husk were just left. So they were just left with echoes of their former self. So the ones that are perhaps showing some forms of intelligence, perhaps maybe that is intrusion from or contamination left over from the ancient technology and heretical lore that the original empire had. So for concept, without getting too far down that rabbit hole, as far as the lore goes of the empires, there was a very powerful empire that gained a lot of power and knowledge, things that were beyond their kin from this primordial god, this eldritch thing. And over time, they came to rely so much on the technology and their powerful magics that they then just thought, well, we don't need to worship this god anymore. We've outgrown it. And it became spiteful and then causes cataclysm. So these the things that are left are remnants of the civilization.
That I like the direction you're going with the whole concept of the Scorned God saying, tearing the place up as he walks out, kind of things, like firebombing it at the bar as he leaves, and that's why it's sort of interesting to me that you have again these creatures that almost are trying to hide from recognition. They don't want to be in the light, they don't want to be seen. Almost again this perception being, we did something bad and we don't want anyone to see us, kind of thing, almost like shamefaced. But then you've got some of them that are starting to move through ritualistic mechanisms, as you said, an echo of their former life. And it just brought to mind to me, is this starting to fall back into patterns of worship of this primordial Scorned God, or is this something else that's going on? Either way, I think it creates a fascinating dynamic for the location.
Exactly. So if this was going to be like a core book, then I would leave it very ambiguous, and then later on, if we drill into supplements, expand it. In as much as, like the original Eberron, you had very vague trappings for Zendrick, but then later on you had a whole supplement to just Zendrick that then kind of espoused more about what lurks in these Cyclopean ruins and what were the things that were left behind. So I thought it would be better to leave things for the GM's imagination. The other thing is that building on that, though, that there actually were some survivors, very few survivors of this previous empire, and they survived by being on the far west side of the continent in the more wild forest land. Those people actually became almost druidic in nature, and they themselves, though, go through this kind of appetitive gesture of trying to atone for the sins of their people. So one of the major functions of this coven or this grove of druids is that they want to finish rehabilitating the island, because the moors are acidic and there is still a very dearth of diversity of life. No animals survive the cataclysm. But one of their major objectives is to, with their wild magics and natural alchemies and stuff, is to rehabilitate those, the Forsaken. They have gone through experiments, and they're trying to come up with the perfect plant life that will grow in, eventually turning them almost into like shambling mounds, and help break them down until they can just dissolve back into the nature. So people that explore this will see a couple of these Forsaken that have like plant growth on them, and they're prototypes of ways of eventually appeasing or just soothing the angry soul within these husks, and eventually laying them back to rest.
Cool. Spencer, you got any questions?
Yeah, so I'm wondering, you mentioned like all of the text, right, to the Primordials kind of missing, right, because of the destruction and the ruins. Have you considered maybe that? I mean, like, that feels like a really good plot hook, right? Because also with the idea of Newport, of maybe there's something else out there.
You're gonna steal my fucking idea.
I was gonna say, has anyone read the thing in the shared drive?
I have not. Is that in there? I'm so sorry. I already hit that. No, that's like too good of a line, so I felt like I had to mention that.
Oh yeah, and so that's part of the point with why the settlements have never been that successful, is that in that west half of the island, you have this coven of druids that are doing everything they can to keep out outsiders. So
I did read that.
Yeah, so they never try to make themselves known, and by sending either Forsaken their action or their control, like the few prototypes they have, or strange plant life to kind of scare people away, because they know in the ruins, if you go deep enough in the ones that are more intact, there are bits of things that have survived. Artifacts, objects of powers, maybe some bits of either magical, magic texts, or even worse, things about this terrible blasphemous god. And if someone got their hands on that could just completely upheave Kaizen. That could cause a lot of implications for the whole continent. So
yeah.
Now, I was wondering, because you had mentioned, he's taken very great care to erase his name, and I'm thinking, if you find out his name, do you get like 3 wishes or something?
That could be something too. Moreover, on a practical thing, is part of it is that Spencer and I have never agreed on a name for the thing, and so I think the fact that we've never made a name is kind of taken a life of its own.
Yeah, I love it. I just had an idea for what it could be.
Primordial spelled backwards.
What?
Primordial spelled backwards.
No. Not the name of it, just like what the thing itself could be. Because we were thinking like if as a primordial, maybe I'm thinking. Well, we'll talk about. We'll hash it out.
Just as headcanon is Lavos from Chrono Trigger.
Nice.
Because it's quasi-sentient. It burrows underground. It is chthonic. It's eldritch, and it's got weird things in it.
Well, that's. I was going to say this is part of that still year 0 event where we've sort of all kind of agreed. There's as Ian mentioned, a chthonic tag to this. Something from the outer dark sort of landed on the planet, caused this upheaval, did whatever. So I'd be curious to see if what you're doing with this area dovetails with some of the other how it dovetails. Is it the same creature, or is it multiple creatures? The unborn baby god. Does anyone else have images of 2001: Space Odyssey?
It's been a while.
It's just that baby in Jupiter and Io at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Except with like tentacles hanging from its face and 16 eyes and stuff like that.
Nothing wrong with that. The internet are down for tentacles.
Yeah,
But otherwise, exactly like that.
exactly.
Jason, you're up. Or any other questions for Ian?
I've got a whole timeline thing about the rise and fall of this thing. We can always explore later.
Nice.
I just like the idea of that scorned god, scorched earth personality. That's just a great way to create ruins.
Very good. Jason, which country do you want? You got 3.
Actually, I have 4 now.
Oh, that's right. Which one do you want?
Ball.
Busy man.
Which one, Ilias?
Ilias, yeah. So we don't need to talk about the hippie were creatures. They're okay. They're good. They're just all star children. They're
I feel like
fine.
hippie were creature should be the next scent from Adventure Scents. Just saying.
Hippie were creature.
Yeah, it smells like
Patchouli.
shaggy dog and patchouli.
That's it. It's patchouli and wet dog, right?
And just a hint of Frank.
Abrasiveness?
We've mixed the finest odors to create hint of abrasiveness.
Angry DM.
Angry DM, the adventure sense.
Patchouli, wet leather, wet dog, and anger.
And stale beer.
Yeah, gotta be. And regret. Why did I take this job?
Yeah.
You're on, Jason.
Yeah. We give a lot of ideas to Adventure Sense. We should get royalties on some of these when they produce them.
I would imagine Jen's probably shaking her head thinking, there's no goddamn way I'm going to.
Why did I ever agree to sponsor that show? That's what she's thinking.
Pull the sponsorship.
I mean, you could feel free to sponsor Wandering Monster. We haven't done anything that abrasive. No, I'm just kidding. They haven't found the bodies.
Just need then have to get like the scent of the svump and whatever that horrible was it the horrible dungeon by the Mad King.
Oh yeah, Trap Within. That's gonna be a real fun one.
That one, when you smell it, it actually gives you some kind of black lung disease.
Yes.
Mildew.
The federal government created a fund for people that use it.
So what do we got in Ilias Doll?
So, very brief overview. Again, Ilias Doll, ancient empire, following on the year 0 cataclysm, took over this area. The 19 families that fled out of the original Sazani city, that's now in ruins in the bay, came onto the continent. And the official religion of Ilias Doll and its subject states, including Kovadarat, is worship of the unborn Lich King. As you can imagine, he's the head of the state. You are supposed to worship him. Because of the 19 families, all 19 families claim descendancy from the pantheon, the very expansive pantheon of gods. They all have a titular god that the family is named after. That's where their names are derived from. They all have a small household shrine devoted to their family deity, the head of their family that created their family. And that small shrine of their family deity known as the Ten Pekarov. And then they may also have additional small shrines to ancestors or other minor deities known as the Ten Preta, which speak to this. Again, we're talking hundreds of minor deities of all kinds of shapes and sizes. The gods of wall and ditches, the god of small herbal household gardens, the god of this, the god of that. It's an imperial bureaucracy, so they just got all kinds of stuff going on. And you can worship any of those. Now, what's important to recognize, though, is the worship of the 19 family gods is critically important to daily life in all of Ilias Doll. And so the major holiday that they celebrate around this is still the fleeing from the now doomed city. And so that flight from the doomed city is their major religious holiday, and they cover all their shrines, including the family shrines. And there's a whole period during that, 19 days. Each day, one of the members of the family has to sponsor a day, and that sponsorship changes depending on what's the wealth and value of the family. So who is preeminent, even among religion, shifts from year to year based on the family dynamics and the royal jockeying that goes on with the Lich King. Now, even though the Lich King is the head of the religion, he really has no intervention at all in what's going on. It's pretty pro forma sort of religious observance from that perspective. But the role of these small deities, even with the average citizen, is pretty important. And so it really is a quid pro quo pantheon, where if you want a favor from a deity, you are going to pay something at a local shrine. So there are local depositories all over the city and in the countryside for folks to make their deposit, almost like some sort of medieval ATM. I'm going to deposit money in, ring the bell, make my prayer, and hopefully I get something in return. That also holds true for the more or less patronage system that goes on with the family deities. So you pray to one of the family deities as being them being your patron, even if you're not part of that family. Donate the money, and then maybe you get, an extra turnip in your rule that week, sort of thing. Now, Iliasdal is a pluralistic society. You can worship anything you want. Good deities, evil deities, ambivalent deities, they don't care. As long as the taxes are paid and the business of the empire continues, worship whomever you want in whatever way you want. Now, as I mentioned, the major holiday is recounting this flight out of the doomed city, covering all of these shrines. So it's a very solemn occasion. Each family tries to outdo the next by holding on each day a festival. So the families themselves have to recreate the flight out of the doomed city. And so they have to give away a lot of their wealth. They go to great lengths to come up with costumes that, while are supposed to look ragged and poor and represent what the survivors had on their backs as they fled the city, because they only could take with them what they could carry or their slaves could carry, that even though they're supposed to look downtrodden, we're still talking really exaggerated costumes, extravagant fabrics being used to make, quote, rags that they wear. And so they go out of their way to up the ante each year and against each other for the 19 days. There's feasts, festivals. They're giving away lots of food and partying. One day, a family may be hosting theater events. One day, they may be holding games. The next one, it's simply just a giant feast. So this goes on for 19 days. And it would remind you a little bit of Saturnalia if you've ever read anything about Roman history, and that roles are sort of reversed. It's 19 days of celebration for the peasants that are in this more or less caste system. They are not required to work during the 19 days, and they're being served by, quote, the royalty, or people who have been paid to stand in for the royalty. But this celebration concludes at the end of the ceremony. Of course, the shrines are uncovered and business goes back to normal. And then the cycle begins again. But again, it follows this whole patronage piece, and the 19 named families, their deities, they are the preeminent piece of society for Iliasdal. The subject state, I'll just mention that because it's part of Iliasdal, the subject state of Kovat Arat does not follow this religion, even though the Lich King stays in his tower known as Grief on that peninsula. So even though Iliasdal has this very expansive imperial bureaucracy with this expansive pantheon, it does not make its way to the subject states like Kovat Arat. So that's my first one anyways. Yes, Spencer.
So question about, you pay the gods, right, in order to get their blessing. If I'm a cleric, let's say, of one of these gods, what kind of cut do I get? Like, how much goes to me versus how much goes to the god itself?
That's a good question.
And that is really dependent on what god you are representing. So depending on the god you represent, there may be a bigger or lesser cut. More importantly is how far up in the pantheon of gods, which have their own strict hierarchy, are you?
If I'm a cleric of the god of ditches, that's going to be worse than the cleric of the god of roads.
Exactly.
It's going to be worse than the god of travel itself.
Yeah. You would get a small portion for your living expenses, obviously, and then depending on the nature of the god, you could have greater or lesser amounts. Your devotion to the god, your own personal charisma, because you're interceding on behalf of the peasantry to the god.
Got
it. If I was to take it out of the mythology and put it into context of gaming, it almost becomes a role, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So if I've collected 100 gold pieces as a gift to the god, what percentage is my cut? And you do a factor based on a charisma roll to see Okay, the God standard cut is going to be 75%. I get to keep 25%, but if I make my charisma roll, maybe I can kick it up. It sounds a little cynical, I know, but
no, I love it. I love a concept of a bureaucracy of gods to such a small degree. I think that's amazing. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I really want to know what the least popular god is, because I've seen, in a lot of like fantasy literature, that if there's a society with lots of gods, there's usually a god that's another intentionally made that is like a fall god for the other gods, or is intentionally scorned or hated as part of like worshiping other gods. So is there a patsy god, or like
the patsy god, right? I like that. Yeah. I think we'll just call him patsy god. Well, I've heard tell that there's an unnamed god who no one knows their name that was hanging around Kaizen there for a while.
Love it.
The Night Soil Men god, right? But coincidentally, the Night Soil Men god's probably pretty well paid.
Yeah. Oh, very.
It's the Gong Father.
It's the Gong. Yes.
Gong Farmer.
Oh yeah. Correct.
That's a good point.
Mm.
Well, not to reveal too much, but I think Frank has some dealings with actual real world government bureaucracy. Phew. How would that go in the real world? Well, yes, and it's a zero-sum game, because the god, in your analogy, the god of woodlands and the god of roads are in competition. I want more roads. You want no more roads, because roads mean less forest. So it really is viewed as a zero-sum game with the gods, just like with the rest of society, wanting to jockey for position, but stuck in a fairly rigid hierarchy. And so it is all competition. Yeah. I also view that, especially if, let's say, you have foreign gods involved in this mix. Foreign gods, yeah, you're welcome to be there. Just recognize that Iliastal gods are also there, and we're talking a multitude of them crowding out all the esoteric space in Iliastal. So you can come in, but there's a crowd already there. It's like the last person invited to a party. That too. Chariot, in this case, chariot key. Depends on who it is. You get a big deity or a big deity with a small penis, and the shrine is absolutely huge. If you get, some of the smaller gods, they got little tiny shrines for small purpose. The god of beggars and con artists, they're going to have a small shrine, but it has deep pockets.
Has anyone ever read the Anomalous Subsurface event or environment? Anomalous Subsurface Environment. It was a Labyrinth Lord built, really great game. Larry is. I can pull up later, but it's a gonzo weird game. But the gods are like orbital satellites, and they are beaming. They beam themselves down when they're overhead to like TVs, and so larger gods get like their own temple with their own dedicated TV, basically, but lesser ones have to share broadcast time. And so this kind of makes me think of that, like if you had really unpopular gods, you get to rent a little shrine for a time. So like there's your designated time for, like you were saying, god of tiny genitalia or whatever. Like you've got like from like 4 to 6 on this holy day, you can worship that god there with the appropriate license fee that you have to pay to the church.
I like that idea. I like that idea so much. I have two images that come to mind immediately. One is a giant roulette wheel that we just spin to see which god gets space on at a time. But the other is then you get these wandering holy men who just have, like multiple gods that they're, hawking for, walking around, and you just go up when you want to make and pick which one you want. But they're all the minor gods.
That was giving my question: is what happens to
Completely
the god?
covered in fetishes and like
Yes.
yeah, that's exactly. Sorry, Spencer. I wasn't
Yeah,
trying
they
to take
open
it
their
from
jacket
I was
up
like, oh,
and
that's
they've
a
got-
real cool image.
Yeah, my
Imagine that
question
being
was, what happens if a god
class.
like doesn't have a shrine? Like, can the god just like wander around looking for followers? But I love the concept of like people hawking to all the gods for them.
Illy has a very close relationship with their gods. They assume the gods at some point are walking around, doing what? Who knows? They also view their sort of heaven or there's the deity plane as being really just like this plane, but with better architecture. So there's very little difference between the two.
Serious.
I love it. I love it. A plus. A plus. I got two questions. One, can women be clergy? Okay. Two, was there ever actually a female gnome forest god? All right, sweet. Oh, okay then. That spawns more questions, but we'll leave it there.
I have a comment and a question. First, have you received letters yet from the Forest Gnome Defamation League? Not your fault. I spawned a bunch of misogynistic forest gnomes. And that's the second series of letters. So my question, though, you answered that yes, there are at least one female forest gnome god in Asmana. Does she ever manifest?
Older siblings always got to clean up the mess. Bye.
Huh. For some reason, I have this lyric from a song keeps going through my head. I am my own grandpa.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Oh, you linked it at one point. I was gonna say I met the Oddfish Games guys at Gen Con. They were a blast, and how to RPG with your cat is hilarious. It's real nice. I got nothing.
Margoo campaign. Is that what you're looking for? Yeah. So we're on. That's not on that. You just talked about family values in Osmana, and that show is about family values. The multi-generational Margoo campaign every Sunday. You know what? It is as wholesome as Lawrence Welk. Yeah, he has issues. Well, and that Lech Felix. And then, of course, you have the actual murder hobos of Frank and Frank. Oh, the often maligned gnome on the show. Admiral. Yes, his valor was stolen.
I've got tons of Kickstarters that I'm doing editing and freelance writing for right now, including one of the larger ones. It's really fantastic if you like to play D&D 5th edition or Old School Essentials, is Worldbreaker / Dark Tides of Zarathos. So it's a duology of zines. The one that is the Worldbreaker is how to destroy your campaign in a cataclysmic ending. So you're good at that, I know, right? And then the other one is Dark Tides of Zarathos, and that same Kickstarter. It is kind of it's a flooded world that is ruled by psionic corsairs. So if you liked Legends of the Dark Water, that whole show from the 90s, that would be something you like. Also doing stretch goal writing on Sundered Sundries. It's a follow-up to All Must Bow. It's system neutral sci-fi horror. And the other one's currently going is Ogre's 11. So if you'd like to run D&D heists for your favorite fantasy TTRPG, Ogre's 11. It's a bugbear's dozen of heists for you to do with your players. But last, I'll just plug a little more for wanloncast.com or Twitter, Twitch, Facebook, wanloncast for Wandering Monster, the TTRPG live play podcasts that I run. So weekly I run a different indie game, and it's a lot of fun. 8:30 to 10:30 p Central, or if you're watching it here, 9:30 to 11:30 because we're in Eastern.
Oh, I got nothing. I was pointing.
I just want to, for the folks that haven't been following Cacophony, though, what level did they manage to get to before you destroyed their campaign? So and the only reason, old school, if I remember the player's manual correctly, it goes to level 20 before you even have to get a new book. I don't have enough character sheets for basic.